I do prepubertal spays and neuters, okay? Bottom line is, why? Well, if you adopt an animal and it breeds, you get those animals back. And we'll go into this, but you know, the question I ask is, why do you say 6 months, 9 months, a year to spay and neuter? That's been the tradition in veterinary medicine. And it was a tradition in America too, for years and years and years. But if you question why, there's no data on it, there's no science on it, it's based on tradition. Most of what we do as veterinarians is based on tradition. Now tradition's great, you know, we know it's safe. Having said that, when you have a crisis, and certainly in America we have a crisis, we had a big crisis. When I graduated in 1989, we were killing 60,000 dogs and cats a day in America. Okay, now we're still killing some, but nothing like that. And that was probably underestimated, just like we're probably underestimating it now. But we went from killing 24 million in a year down to maybe 4 to 6 million a year, depending on who you want to read. So 10% of veterinarians, and it's more like 15% now. When I first did this talk, it was about 10% are doing prepubertal animals. How do you define prepubertal? That's kind of variable there. For me, it's 4 months and under. Okay, the compromise right now that we're working on in the States is trying to get vets to say, okay, we always do it at 6 months. Once again, why? No science, because we're kind of slow to change as veterinarians. We tend to be stubborn about that, and it's probably a good idea since we're dealing with medicine. The city of Merida has 200,000 street dogs. Okay, we're going to do them as they come in, no matter what age they are, because we're not going to be back for a year or 6 months. And by that time, they're already having more litters, so this compounds the problem. Kind of the history, just so you know, or you can go back in the literature, as early as the 1900s, early 1900s, they talk about the bloodless spay. Okay, when you do prepubes, it's the best kept secret in veterinary medicine. It's scary. People say, oh, you need special equipment. No, it's the same things. You use the same things. You just make a ton of smaller holes. And the bottom line is, they don't die, they recover faster. There's multiple reasons why you do these. But you really, it's very, very efficient. And if you can actually tear the ovarian out, don't have to even tie it, and they will not bleed to death. Now, I still tie mine, but I'm here to tell you, you can't just tear them. Literally tear them all out, clamp, tear, clamp, tear, clamp, tear. It takes about 10, 15 seconds. Suture it, 1 stitch, 2 stitches, and you're done. I don't know anything about large animals. Evidently, you do large animals, pigs in particular, really young, you castrate and just kind of yank them out. Well, he noticed that they'd adopt animals and they'd have litters and they'd bring them back. So it's just a continuous cycle. It just never ended. And he said, well, why don't we just spay and neuter them all before they go out? And they said, well, can you do that? I think I can. And he started doing it. Leo Lieberman in 1987 wrote the first article that was put in JAMA, the Journal of Veterinary Medical Association. And that's a prestigious journal in America. So if you get in that, you're saying something. And it was really controversial. I mean, you would have thought he was asking to rape babies or something. I mean, people went nuts over it. And I graduated in '89, and we were just learning about it in '89. I worked at humane societies all through college and all through my veterinary service. I worked animal control. So for me, when they talked about that, I was just drawn to it, like a fly to sugar. It just seemed right the thing to do. I did a study in 1989 right after I graduated, looking at the pros and cons, and we found nothing negative. It was unpublished. I was working at the Humane Society, and I started doing prepubals right after I graduated. And it wasn't until '91 with the University of Florida, the first controlled study, where they took 7 months, 7 weeks, and they looked at them, followed them out for a year. No statistical difference whatsoever, except for one thing. And they found that the animals that were neutered younger were slightly taller and leaner. And most people think the opposite. It stunts their growth. It does not stunt your growth. It makes you taller. All right. If you go to human literature and look at humans that have been neutered, and they do that to men in ancient China, and things like that, many times those people were much, much taller. And for the record, they lived longer too. They're healthier. These are American stats. I don't know Portugal stats, but in America, we have adoption contracts. You sign a contract, you promise to come back and get your animal spayed or neutered. People don't, okay? When we were giving away spays and neuters for free in one town in Colorado, all right? They could go to like 75% of the vets, and the vets got paid really good money, so the vets would say, yeah, this is almost our average price. It wasn't cheap. This was like normal prices, and the vets were like, yeah, this is a really good idea. Less than 30% of the people the first year brought their animal back to be fixed. So what do you think those other 70% were doing? Of course, they're reproducing, so all you do is shoot yourself in the foot. You've never solved the problem. So spay and neuter contracts do not work. We passed a law 2 years ago in Colorado. It is mandatory that you spay and neuter prior to adoption from humane societies. There's loopholes in it. People get around from time to time. Sometimes there's not a vet. You're in a small town, there may not be a vet around that can do young animals, or refuses. Maybe it's only a large animal vet that doesn't want to try. There are exceptions, but for the most part, all the big groups are doing it. They have for years. All the good humane societies have been doing it for years. Cats are 45 times more prolific than humans. Dogs, 15 times. We cannot reproduce faster than them. They will beat us every time. So it's just common sense. Now, do I think you're a bad pet owner if you don't fix your animal? No. In Germany, they don't have an overpopulation problem, and they don't fix their animals. But their animals aren't strays. They don't have a lot of stray problems. In Belgium and Holland, there's a lot of places where the problems are very, very minimal. But that has to do with the difference in societal structures, although every place has a cat issue, without a doubt. In America, has anyone ever heard the 70% rule? Okay, all right, that's good. And bottom line is, the theory is, if you certainly vaccinate 66 to 70% of the animals or humans in a population, you stop the spread of disease. So that was sent over to, if you spay and neuter 70% of the animals, you stop reproduction problems. Not true. You got to get closer to 90, 95%. So reproduction is a little bit different than disease. Okay, and so that's just the reality. Because in America, we still have an overpopulation problem. Yet 87% of our cats are fixed, and 76% of our dogs are fixed. So clearly the 70% rule doesn't apply. Euthanasia is still the #1 reason, and I shouldn't say euthanasia, killing is the #1 reason of death in companion animals in America and worldwide. It's estimated that we kill over 1 billion dogs a year. The money we spend on poisoning, trapping, holding, killing, however you want to look at it, shooting dogs every year is enough to spay and neuter every dog and cat on the planet. So we really waste our resources in a lot of ways. And it's not sustainable. A fixed animal, a street animal, they did a study in Denver, an average street cat, male, tomcat, lived 18 months intact on the streets in Denver. If you neutered him, he lived about 4 years. If you neutered him and brought him inside, he lived 12 years. You tell me what's healthier. And for the record, people always think of cats as kind of these feral, wild animals. It's Felis domesticus. Okay, they have been domesticated for over 6,000 years, 6,000, 10,000. The dog has been domesticated for 60 to 100,000, depending on who you want to read. So the dog has really been domesticated a long time. Dogs are actually better at reading our body language, especially the more inbred ones, are better at reading our body language than other dog body language, which creates problems in shelters. Okay. No puppy and kitten should be adopted prior to 8 weeks. That's a law in Colorado. I don't know if you have that here, if you adopt at any age, but truthfully, you really want puppies and kittens to be on their mom for 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks ideally, and then maybe wean for a week or two. Obviously, cats progress a little faster than dogs, but in Colorado, we just passed a law you can't adopt them prior to 8 weeks of age. My personal belief is you have an organization, Humane Society, NGO, you should never send a dog or cat through your doors that's not fixed. Because if you do, you're contributing to the problem. The bonding period is 8 to 12 weeks for dogs, cats 6 to 9. What do I put that in? If a dog, and there are some people that do behavioral studies, will say, well, we're seeing some negative behavior from early pubertal neutering. The question is it from the neutering, or is it from the interaction? Maybe they're semi-feral, maybe they're caught, that they have a bad period of time interacting with humans. So how you deal with those animals at early ages do matter, because dogs and cats imprint. Okay, they learn a little bit different than we do. But just for the record, 90% of our personalities as human beings is set by age 5. Okay, most kids are in school by age 5. So there's no question that personalities of dogs and cats are all different, and it's really hard to be conclusive about some of those studies, because you also find studies say neutering early is actually better. The veterinary profession, here we go. Once again, why? Who does 9 months, 10 months, a year? Anybody have an opinion on that? And my question is why? That's what I was taught. Okay, why? Now, in the 50s, our anesthetics were horrible. In the 60s and 70s, our anesthetics were pretty bad. We have incredible anesthetics now. You know, you can do everything on injectable. In fact, on the human side, and I'm a pretty good expert on the human side from the standpoint I've had 13 major surgeries in the last 7 years. They did both, when I did my knee replacements, 100% on injectable. I was not on gas at all. All right, 3.5 hour surgeries, all injectable. So injectables are every bit as safe as gas anesthesia. It's a matter of what you get used to. So, and we can talk more about that. The AVMA, which is a pretty big organization, and they're very, very conservative. They have approved prepubertal spaying and neutering as a form of population control since 1993. I like science versus tradition, you know. Correlation versus causation. My favorite story is, if you look at the sale of ice cream in New York City, as the sale of ice cream goes up, the murder rate goes up. And if you read the study, you say, well, if we don't sell ice cream, we'll have less murders. Makes sense, you know? No, because why does the sale of ice cream go up? Because the temperature goes up. So as the ambient air temperature goes up, people buy more ice cream. As the ambient air temperature go up, people get a little upset a little faster, so they, you know, they react more. So, you know, science is not always exact in what we do, and you have to look at the big picture. There's a big difference between correlation and causation. And what I'll say is, if you neuter something small and something happens to it a year later, 2 years later, 10 years later, well, you should have neutered it small. I mean, unfortunately, there is that kind of criticism, and it's really hard to get from the point A to point B. Supply versus demand. As a veterinarian, I have to believe, as a businessman, I'm a pretty successful veterinarian. We're going to do about 2.2 million euros this year at my one clinic in Denver, Colorado. That's not bad, all right? So, and my clinics overseas are profitable. The point is, I believe in making money. I don't have a problem making money, but I do all kinds of charity work too, and it's a positive thing. It's a two-way street, you know. But if the supply is here for animals, okay, and the demand is down here, tell me why would I want to spend $500 on a bone surgery when I can go get a new cat or new dog for free? You know. Now I understand the human-animal bond, but not everyone has that, and we see animals as being very disposable for a large percentage of our population. Well, if that percentage of that population couldn't get an animal quite so readily, that would make that animal more valuable. So I'm a firm believer in dropping the supply, you know, down to the level of the demand and below. And in the long run, that's going to elevate my status as a veterinarian and allow me to make more money. These are just some of the groups that endorse prepubertal spay and neuter. It's vast, and I said at the time Bob Christensen did the survey, it's probably up to 15 to 18% of veterinarians are probably doing prepubes now. Certainly most humane societies in the state are doing it, but there's a bunch of groups up there, and some very prestigious universities, I might add. Colorado State's where I graduated from. So, humane organizations. This is where it gets controversial as a veterinarian, because I take the veterinary side sometimes, I take the Humane Society side sometimes, and I try to do what I think is in the interest of the animal. Warehousing, building shelters will never resolve overpopulation. It just won't do it. You can only put so many, you build a shelter for 100 animals, what do you do when you have 101? You know? Now, I understand that most people do not adopt animals through shelters here in Portugal. Is that true? Pretty low adoption rate? You know? So that even, you know, that even tells me more you shouldn't be having shelters. The way to deal with it is to prevent the overpopulation so the animals aren't in the shelter to begin with. And there's always going to be some of that. My idea of a shelter is a place for temporary housing, for end-of-life decisions, for the little old lady who has 5 cats but doesn't have much money, you know, so maybe she'll go to a shelter that may have a vet that helps her out. You know, and sure, adoption, but that should be a small part. Education. Shelter should be about education, if nothing else. As a profession in medicine, we should be about education, if nothing else. If you just tell your clients what to do, and they don't understand why you're telling them that, why are they going to do it? Now, some are going to do it because you told them. But many, especially the newer generation, are going to go on Google, and, you know, and there's nothing worse than a client that comes in and says, I just went on the internet, and you know, that said, and it's like, oh, you know, that's when you just say, oh God, here we go, you know. It's every veterinarian's nightmare. But the truth is, you know, this is the age of information, but it's also the age of disinformation. For every one thing out there that's true, there's 2 that may not be quite so true. Or, once again, correlation versus causation. You can read reports that you can make all kinds of conclusions if you have a certain point of view. If you have a different point of view, you can make all kinds of conclusions the other way. All right? That's not science. I really believe you have to have a spay-neuter program. I really believe you have to do feral cats. As high as 80% of the cats in the spring of the year in Colorado come from free-roaming females. Okay, so most are feral, but some are just owned animals where people just are responsible and they just kick the animal aside. You know, I always say cats really don't. People don't adopt cats. Cats adopt people. You know, and how many times you get the pregnant cat that ends up on your door? Oh, she's so cute. You bring her in the next morning. You get, oh, I got 5. I have more than that 5. You know, and then 6 months later you got 25. You know, so I understand how these things get out of control because many times it is the little old lady in tennis shoes that's attracted to them and feeding them, and they just don't have the resources. So, you know, so all of a sudden they have a big problem and nobody wants to address it. Well, that big problem becomes a societal problem real quick because those cats are going to start moving out. You know, especially some of the males as they wander around. And they cause a lot of problems. I absolutely do not believe that euthanasia should be used as a form of population control. Euthanasia is end-of-life decision, pain and suffering decisions. Now, having said that, and this is where I do some of the cat people, I will not, if I open a cat up to do spay-neuter, she's pregnant, I abort her. Period, end of discussion. There's no way I'm going to bring a kitten into this world. Not in America. Too many. We have too many. Never happened. And some people have no problem with that. Some people call me a murderer. I can live with that. Once again, it doesn't make any sense to bring 5 kittens home, you know, when you have 20, 30 already at your house. It's a utilitarian principle. You know, but I kind of feel that way about myself. When I get to the point where I'm no longer functional in society, I have no problem euthanizing myself, okay? And if you're real religious, well, that's a problem. And we have a lot of Catholics. I assume most people here are probably Catholic, at least by birth, if not practicing. You know, we have a very high Hispanic population in Denver, and people will bring a cat in, well, if it's pregnant, don't spay it. No, it's not the way we work. And they'll say, well, you know, I don't believe in abortion. So it's not abortion, it's a cat, it's not a human. You know, I don't particularly believe in abortion that way either. You know, but at the same time, what are you going to do with the kittens? You know, and I just ask, well, are you a vegetarian? Are you vegan? You obviously believe in death. You know, you don't mind eating veal on Sunday night, you know, so you're opposed to killing based on what, you know? I mean, we unfortunately, you know, kind of shift our human ideas on people over to animals sometimes, and I think it's a really dangerous thing to do. Just trying to find that balance, and it's not always an easy balance to find. The feral cats, the little stat. Now, I'm not sure how you have a 0.1 litter, I'm not sure you have a half a kitten, but the stats are, the average female in Colorado, in America, has 2.1 litters per year, 4.5 kittens. Okay, we can't reproduce. You know, the average woman is doing good to have 1 baby every now and then. You know, so and they just and the funny thing is when you have a brother and sister, and all of a sudden the sister's pregnant, they'll say, "That's a brother and sister. They don't do that, do they?" Yeah, they're animals, people. You know, so and that goes back to that education part. We've done a really bad job of educating the public and, you know, giving them our point of view on things. We really do. I don't know where people get their education from, but I really require my veterinarians to go into public schools and things like that. That's one of the requirements we have. And I'm here to tell you, if you spend the time doing that, it pays back tenfold, and, you know, in terms of your business. The medical side of this, and this is my favorite, and if you saw my notes on this, I got stuff scribbled all over. Does anybody have any direct concerns? You know, urinary incontinence, one you hear all the time. No definitive studies on urinary incontinence, all right? You hear 4 to 8%, 4% of unfixed animals get urinary incontinence, as high as 8% of fixed animals. And it goes from 8 to 16%. So even if it's doubled, it's a pretty low rate. If you look on the humans literature, and I do a lot of that, humans that have babies are more likely to have urinary incontinence than humans that don't have babies. That would be one thing. I absolutely do not believe it's hormonally driven, although people still are under that perception. And the reason I say that is you do not see it in smaller breed dogs, as a general rule. It's much less common. You don't see it in males. It's really rare in males. It's possible, but it's very, very rare. And it does occur at a much, much lower rate in smaller breed dogs. Now, you start talking Great Danes, Rottweilers, all the German breeds, as a matter of fact, all the breeds that have hypothyroidism built into them, all the breeds that have allergy issues built into them. And if you look at the studies, even some of the studies will say, we don't know. We know there's this correlation, but we don't really know if it's cause and effect because there's so many other factors involved. And we just don't know. That's the truth. But I do know that we're killing 5% of our population in America, 5%, you know, dead every year because of no other reason being born. All right, I do know that, and that is a fact I stand on. As far as dogs roaming, you cut it by about 90%. Dogs urinating in the house, urine marking, 50%. Aggression, 50-60%. So if it's an aggressive dog, those are behavioral problems, and if they've been around for a while, it becomes part of their personality. You know, neutering a dog that urinates in the house is not conclusive in terms of, you can't promise it's not going to urinate in the house again. That's the bottom line. It's about a flip of a coin. Now with cats, it's about 90% effective, because it really is driven by hormones. So cats are slightly different. Cats are not small dogs. Cats are different, all right? And the people who hoard cats and put cats together, cats are really not meant to be with each other. And you say, well, they live in colonies. Yes, and guess what? Those colonies are genetically related. They're sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, okay? They really don't like outside cats. So there's a lot of things we do, round up cats and we shove them all in, and we can't figure out we have problems with them. I have the 3-cat rule. If you have 3 cats in your house, you have a problem, all right? You always. No one that has 3 cats doesn't have a problem. I don't care what they say. Someone's peeing around the house, someone's doing something. I don't think so. Well, yeah, you haven't found it yet, you know. Or you lift up the couch and there's a bunch of feces underneath it. So, what I will tell you is they live longer. Cats live 3 to 5 years longer on average. Dogs live 1 to 3 years longer overall. This is an kept inside type animal, okay? So, secondary sex characteristics, will you have a smaller vulva? Yes. One of the classic things, it was out of a study out of the UK, probably, I want to say in the 70s, 80s. They were looking at, and they said if you neuter them, they have a smaller penis, and therefore they're more prone to FUS or flood now, feline urinary tract disease, or I learned it as feline urologic syndrome, so there was change in terminology. Okay, that study has been totally debunked. All right, you still see vets that'll quote it, you know, but the reality of it is, if you look at the propulsion studies where they actually put water pressure up the penis, the urethra opens up, and it can pass the same amount as a bigger penis. So it's not has to do with the penis, it has to do with the urethra size that matters. All right, and I've never seen a cat that I couldn't pass a tomcat catheter in. And if you can pass a tomcat catheter, you can usually pee out most grit and stuff like that. So the penises are smaller, but the urethra is not. It's the same size, people, okay? And that's been proven several times over and over. Now, what does cause crystals, you know, in the bladder? Diet. And when I first started working in Slovakia years ago, they didn't have commercial foods, no kibble. We never saw hyperthyroidism, and we never saw crystals. Now we have commercial food. Now is that a correlation or causation? I don't know. I have my suspicion, but I just know that feral cats rarely have urologic problems unless they're fed dry food. So there's definitely something there. And the truth is, if you look at, once again, on the human side, women with osteoporosis, which is very common in America, almost unheard of in Africa. Why? Because we eat a high meat diet. And the thing about a high meat diet, it acidifies the urine, so it leaches some of the calcium stuff out. And it's directly correlated with a high meat diet. Well, what do cats eat? A high meat diet. So an acidified urine is a positive thing for struvite. Now we're seeing oxalate. When I was in school, we never had oxalate with cats. That was only 20-some years ago. You know, we just never saw oxalate. Now oxalate's real common. Once again, why? You know, how do you not have it? All of a sudden you have it 20-some years later. The foods, I'm totally convinced. Thyroid, there's no correlation with thyroid, but thyroid is epidemic in America. And we've just bred it into animals. Some people say, well, that's from being neutered. Well, it has nothing to do with that. I see in obesity. A female dog that's fixed is 2 times more likely to be obese than a non-female dog that's intact. That female dog is intact. Why? Female dogs that are fixed in America live in the house. They're part of our family. We feed them like we feed ourselves. Okay, America, we were the fattest nation on earth for years. Mexico passed us. We will get it back. We're competitive. We'll do better. We eat more. So, I mean, it is directly related. You know, I see, just ridiculously obese animals. They're intact. Males, 8 years old, and they're as big as the chairs there. You know what I'm saying? Like, but then you turn to the person, they're the same. So, okay, feed your dog, okay, never mind. You're not going to win, is the point. And that's that education thing. You really try to talk to them about why this isn't healthy for the animal, but it's really hard to get across because that's just the way they feed them, It's like trying to get a trapper not to feed the cats for 24, 48 hours prior to trapping. Some people do it, but most is just, oh, they're my babies, they're going to start. I give them a little bit, and they're going, you didn't catch half instead of all, and you only get half of them, So the human behavior is a big part of all this. So urinary continence is the biggest single thing I see consistently around the world people talk about. That's really the biggest thing. You ever say with cats, every now and then someone will bring up, the FUS thing, but obesity, sure. Once again, I'm totally convinced. An intact dog that's on a chain in the backyard, have you ever seen one that was fat? Okay, it doesn't matter whether they're fixed or not, because they don't get much human interaction. They throw a little bit of food to them every now and then, and that's kind of their life. All right, you take that dog and you fix it, you break it aside, it changes. They sit at the table, they're looking at you. And if you have kids, forget it, you're gonna have a fat animal, okay? I had 3 kids when I was younger, and my dog was a lab, which means that she's hypothyroid automatically, you have to prove them not being hypothyroid, all right? But the bottom line is, my dog was very good at eating, and she would follow the kids around, so, once again, it's that whole dynamics. And when we do these surveys, we don't take all those things into account. And we do a survey and say, okay, cancer, osteosarcoma is 3.5 times more likely in a fixed animal than an unfixed animal. Well, when they're talking about Rottweilers in particular, a certain breed, all right? But what they fail to understand is that 76%, 3 out of 4 dogs in America are fixed. So the population base that you're doing the study in does skew it. And they never factor that in when they look at the statistics, and you have to. It's part of the deal. Because if 3 to 1, it would be a pretty normal ratio. That would be a normal ratio. So when they say, well, it's 2 times more likely, okay, but there's 3 times more of those dogs. So, so once again, it gets back causation versus correlation. And when people use those studies against me, I'll go back to the study and say, look, the author right here says this is non-conclusive, and we need to look at this, this, and this to really know for sure. So what he's saying is this is a correlation, not a causation. But people take it, they have their own agenda. And one of the last studies out of UC Davis was funded by the American Kennel Club. Now, what do you think the American Kennel Club wanted you to say? They're pro-breeding, obviously. So, always question literature, always question science, because if we don't, we never move forward. And I can give you several. Several good examples. One I'll just say this: when I first started doing vaccines, I did the first public vaccinations in America, in Colorado. I didn't know it was illegal at the time. I thought I was doing a good job. The vets came unglued, and I got away with it, and it's all fine. But I knew before I started doing that, I was going to learn everything I could about vaccines. And I went back 20 years in the literature and read everything. And without a doubt, whoever funded the study, whoever vaccine company was the biggest contributor to the university, their vaccine won that contest. How is that possible? I mean, from a science standpoint, just statistically, from a science standpoint, and I did research for years, I'm thinking, there's something not right here, and it wasn't by a lot, but at that time we had 12 vaccines, 12 major vaccines in America. We don't have that many now, but we had 12. So, we're talking, University of Tennessee would come up, well, Fort Dodge is a little bit better than Mariel, but, University of Ohio would say, no, Mariel's a little bit better than Fort Dodge, which is a little bit better, but, there's just no way in my mind that can be right. It's not possible. How can you look at 20 years of literature like that and just get so correlated, once again, correlated, but that's got to be a causation. We're going to follow the money. So I'm a big fan of following the money. Guidelines: hypoglycemia, hypothermia, hypovolemia. Those are the big ones you worry about. All right. Less so now with hypoglycemia. These once again, this was from quite a few years ago, and we thought that would be a real issue. It is an issue with really skinny animals and really, really young ones. And we'll do a little glucose on their gums and stuff before and after surgery. For a 5-week-old puppy that's got body fat and nursing mom, it's not a problem. Hypovolemia is not much of a problem because once again you tear those out, but they do have a higher respiratory rate, they do have a higher heart rate, their sympathetic nervous system not as developed, so they don't feel pain quite the same as adults. I'm not going to get in the whole pain discussion, but they bounce back really quick. 2 hours, 3 hours after these guys have been done, they're playing, eating, and once their mom does them, they don't want to say, leave me alone, I don't feel so hot. So it's amazing how well they do. We do hold off food, and 2 hours and 4 hours is kind of the standard. Having said that, I a lot of times use younger puppies right on mom, we'll pull them off when they're still sucking, and put them into them. And we don't have a problem with vomiting and that kind of stuff. And we don't tend to tube them, but they're really, really fast too, so we're done fast. And when, and 2 hours later, they're back nursing on mom. We do administer glucose sometimes we don't, depending on how they look. I like to substitute fluids. I don't know why. It's just one of those things I start doing. I can't give a scientific reason for it. Doesn't seem to hurt them. Maybe helps them a little bit, So, but the biggest thing is keeping them warm. I'd say before anything else, if you have an issue, because it has to do with surface area. You know, the smaller surface area, when the smaller animal, the greater surface area on a per square meter basis, so therefore they lose heat really fast. So we basically have to keep them warm, and we usually use heated tables, or we put them right on. Actually, in my surgery room, my floor, we put this tile down, we heated the floor, so we can actually lay them on the floor, but it's heated, so it works out nice. The other thing is, with larger animals, depending on where you come from, some people do 3 preps, so they really slop it and get really all wet and everything, you know. That's great, it keeps it nice and clean. You don't want to do that with pre-pubes, because whether you put an alcohol, whatever you're baited on, it doesn't matter what you're scrubbing with, but you're putting a moist thing on a little bitty animal, and it just drops their temperature really fast. So we do real minimal prepping. But having said that, we don't get, you know, a female hunting dog comes in and you have mud stuck around her nipples and you've got to scrub off for 5 minutes. That's a different story than a pre-pube. I mean, that's 3, 4, 5 weeks old. They're usually really, really clean. And a lot of times they don't have much hair to begin with. Keep the surgery time to a minimum, and basically you do really well. And surgery time, if you talk to Dr. Marvin Mack, who's a legend in Spain, or Terry Pack, Dr. Nelson or Tony down in Mexico, I mean, people who do large volumes, we all kind of came to the same conclusion separately. The surgery time is every bit as important as any single factor. They use much more expensive suture material. So it comes back to dollars, trying to find that balance, right? Well, right there, if the one lady that I was working with had her incisions for a cat like that, and all of a sudden by the time we were done, they were down to that. Now, eventually they'll be down to that. Well, okay, how much suture does it take to do that? How much suture does it take to do that? You know, I mean, so you just cut your surgery cost suture-wise by 60, 75%, you know. So I'm hoping what they'll do is better suture material, you know, because if you're going to use, I mean, she says we have a lot of inflammatory responses and a lot of swelling, you know, in our cats. Well, they're using, you know, 3 or 4 or 3-aught or 2-aught Vicryl, you know, for that long incision. Vicryl is very, very reactive. Now, can you get away with Vicryl? Yeah, we use it in Mexico all the time on them down the wall. We don't put it in the sub-Q, we don't put it in the skin, because we know we're going to have problems. But that's a very tropical, very humid place. And that's a great incision material, but we can talk about that a little bit later, too. This is the advantages. Extremely low complication rate. They should die and they don't. I mean, even the ones that you just know are going to die, they won't. I don't know why, but they're just tough. Very low death rate, very rapid recovery. Short surgical time. Pre-pube, female, puppy or kitten, really, you know, you're looking at 5-6 minutes max. You know, my time when I consider you a good spay neuter vet, you should be able to do most cats. And I say average, whatever an average cat is, between 5 and 10 minutes. Average dog, 10 to 20 minutes. If you take more than 30 minutes to do a surgery in my surgery suite, you're going to be getting more instruction, unless it's a fluke. It happens every now and then, but overall, time on the surgery table is really important to me. And that doesn't. But the key here is, I don't consider that going fast. I double tie everything. You know, speed does not equal good. And anyone that comes to me and says, I want to get fast, I don't teach those people. I want to teach people who want to be good. And good just comes with time. You'll get good when you do 10,000. You know, they say to master anything, you have to spend 10,000 hours doing it. All right, you do about 10,000 surgeries, you're getting competent if you've tried it all, if you're doing it all. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So this is, we do all those, no matter. That's Dr. Marvin Mackey right there. Katerina's on the right here. She's a vet. She was a vet student from Slovakia. Now she has her own clinic, very successful in Slovakia. She had the first kind of all-female clinic in Eastern Europe, and they do large numbers of spay neuter. But they do, you know, once again, Slovakia is really close to Germany, so not everybody wants to get their animals, but they don't have an overpopulation problem, except for in the gypsy areas. That's where it's the biggest problem, so, which I don't think is all that uncommon. This was a nice little kitten, and you can see this. I mean, you think that thing's bleeding much? It couldn't bleed if you just tore it out. Once again, I tend to tie them off, but you certainly don't have to, and that's the kitten. So I think it was 3 weeks old, you know, so it can be done. And what I do know is they can't read or write, but they sure can multiply. Okay, they're really good at that, so keep that in mind. And that's the pre-pube talk, pretty simple.